with the Arizona legislature, and so we have asked Harriet and Ann Schneider to put together a program. Harriet is going to introduce Ann, and Ann is going to talk until about 1:45, and then we'll have some discussion and try to break up right about
or less.
Yeah. Okay. So Harriet, come on up.
Don't panic.
So I'm going to apologize in advance. Lena Wallen, whom we all know, is going to be honored today at noon as Citizen of the Year. And since Patty Garcia and I nominated her, we're going to go cheer. And so I'm going to make a few brief statements and apologize and leave immediately and just say I'm sorry. I don't know how many of you know that, but my dissertation at Rice was on legislative behavior and linked it to the margins by which any legislator, congressman or state legislator, the margin of victory. So if you won by a big margin, did you act differently from somebody who barely squeaked by and won a very close election? So everybody was simply riveted by the topic. And the media wouldn't quit calling, but I've always been very interested in legislative behavior. So I'm going to just do a few broad things to think about because Ann knows the Arizona legislature, the bills, and the mechanics better than any other person in the state of Arizona. So you have got the world's best right here coming up. One of the things I want to say to you as Democrats is you know that you don't pay enough attention to state government, right? Right. The Democratic Party, as us, pay much more attention to presidential races. We don't even pay that much attention to congressional or senatorial races. Whatever there is about us, we like big stars and presidential candidates. And I've said this before, we like to fall in love with our candidates. The Republicans don't have that same kind of a fanhood. They want to win the majority. They want to elect the leadership of the legislature, and they want to ram through their agenda. That's why we don't work as well as they do when they take power. They are absolutely riveted on rules, regulations, formalities that we think are just blah, 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 but they use those things to get their legislation passed and enacted. And it's time that we started paying attention so that we can play the game on the same field that they play it on. We don't play it as well. The states are generally overlooked, but the states, if you remember your Constitution, control election conditions. They're the ones who run all the elections. They write the rules, the laws, etc. Federal government's come in and said some things about, maybe you ought to let everybody vote, not just white people. You know, maybe you ought to let everybody vote, not just white people. You know, things like that. They keep repeating that. But the states control the electoral process, and that behooves us to understand. If you don't watch what the legislature is doing, they will gerrymander districts so the same people get reelected over and over again. And since it's generally not a democratic victory, we're the ones who pay the price. We get gerrymandered out of victory. So this is one of the explanations for why don't we win more races? Why don't we do better at the state legislature? It's because we don't play the game, because we don't understand the game. The power of the state legislatures is enormous. Voting can be either easy or hard to accomplish. Richard Thaler's Nobel Prize was won on the basis of his insight that if you want people to do something, make it easy. If you don't want them to do something, make it hard. Simple rule, Nobel Prize. The states also have the power to schedule elections, how, when, where. My suggestion to all of us is that we begin to promote an amendment, or an initiative rather, and have Election Day a holiday.
Yes.
Everyone who votes gets a full day pay, maybe. And if you don't vote, you don't get paid. You could do a lot of things to make it more, important to vote. But we could do a lot, we just don't think that way. So we're going to start thinking that way starting this afternoon. There's very little interest by state voters on what the state legislatures are doing. Ann is going to correct that, and we will know way more than we thought we would ever know about the state legislature when she gets through. Because there's so little attention paid, they can do some perfectly outrageous things, which Ann will bring to our attention. There are issues that are very important to us: women's issues, equal pay issues, racial issues, gender issues. We've got all kinds of school issues, like if we're going to have public schools, are we going to pay for them or what? We've got all kinds of issues that we need to start addressing, and that's where we have to pay attention once again to state legislatures. Finally, there are interest groups that have figured this out long before we will figure it out. One is ALEC. How many know what ALEC is and can tell me legislation that they have passed? Good. Do you know what 6 is? Ah, that is the progressive answer to ALEC. SIX, all capital letters, which are state, and it's not information, and what did he tell me it was?
Innovation.
Innovation. States Innovation Exchange. And the idea of ALEC was all the interest groups would get together in a room and influence state legislators to pass legislation that all the big corporations like. Well, 6 is taking the opposite way, which is get together about what things are states doing well that we could also do the same way. So it's an innovation group, but it's the progressive group, and that's who we ought to be getting to know. We ought to invite Joaquin Rios up here. He's the executive director of 6, and he's a bright young thing. He was on the state executive committee when I was first vice chair or something, but he knew me when I called him, and I went, oh really? And he thought, yeah, okay. So anyhow, there are groups that we can ally with, and 6 is one of them. And I suggest strongly that Daryl, I'm sorry, that would be a great person to have up this spring.
Oh, yeah.
And let him talk about what are the legislative initiatives that they're going to start. Now, it is my enormous pleasure to introduce Dr. Ann Schneider of ASU. She knows more about the state legislature than they do, thank God. And we are grateful for her diligence and her newsletter. Everyone here has to sign up for the newsletter. Thank you, Ann. When you come back to see him, you come stay with me.
Oh, okay.
Bye.
And thanks, everyone. Is this mic on? Do I need the mic? Don't need it.
First of all, what is your, how do you get a hold of you and get on your newsletter?
Here's how. Here's the really easy way. See this clipboard? How many of you already signed up for it? I know some of you do because I see some of my peeps here. And I put out this alert myself, but it is a project of the Unitarian Universalist social justice statewide group, and you can sign up here. Now if you don't want to do that, you can send me an email, and my email is real simple: Ann with an E, A-N-N-E .Schneider, spelled the German way. That's my ex-husband's name, not mine. S-C-H-N-E-I-D-E-R, and just like an academic, it's then at ASU, not N-A, ASU.edu. And I bet you guys would just pass this around. My newsletter comes as an email like this. It'll be in your email, and you just scroll down and read it. Or there's a link also to a PDF version. Now, the thing is, you can't learn everything all at once. Okay, you just can't. I'm a generalist. So in the newsletter, I cover bills in our legislature that have social justice implications. And you might be most interested in education or voter suppression or environment or something. And you don't need to be a policy wonk and read the whole thing. You can scroll around to the part you want and take a look at that. And the idea here is that gradually, and this clipboard will be coming around, you guys, I won't leave until you've all had a chance to. You gradually learn about bills. You gradually learn background. You gradually, and that's what this is about. Harriet said, the guy who won the Nobel Prize for economics. Make it easy. Well, one of my favorite sayings is, people are not likely to do something they've never thought of. Maybe I could win a Nobel Prize in economics. People are not likely to do something that has never occurred to them. It just doesn't happen. So part of what a newsletter like this is about is to help you, help it occur to you to do something, but also, that's my phone, just ignore it. My sister and my sister-in-law are texting me all morning about the federal shutdown, which we can talk about at the end if you want. But what was I getting ready to say? But the thing is, one of the things here, this helps educate you about background. Also, I provide the bill number, okay, and my short description of what it's about, so that you don't have to read the whole thing, and I don't give you a whole bunch of talking points. I'm really kind of interested in factoids. This bill says X, Y, and Z. Supporters say X, opponents say Y. You know, and I usually, in that way, can make it pretty clear as to what the implications are for social justice. And on social justice, I'm talking about economic justice, justice of opportunity, racial justice, environmental justice, and so on. Now, with that said, gosh, you all, this is a great group. Thank you for coming out. And I am going to talk about, can you hear me without this? It's better with it. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay. These go up because now I can read. I can't see you now, but I can see my notes. So, okay. Let me start by talking about how many of you here remember the 1970s? Most of us. Do any of you remember the Equal Rights Amendment? Yes. Well, there's going to be another big push right here in Arizona for the Equal Rights Amendment this year. In fact, today at between 10 and 11 down in Phoenix, the statewide task force had a meeting. Since they always have trouble getting a hearing, they got a room in the Tower Building and held their own hearing this morning on the Equal Rights Amendment. A bill has not been filed yet, but it will soon, and there will be both Democrat and Republican co-sponsors. And there's 37 states have ratified this. You only need 38, so what's the big deal? Well, Congress put a 7-year limit on this, and the lawyers now are really challenging this. And in fact, in Congress, there's 2 different bills that would extend the limit, the time limit. And if they don't pass those, I talked to Diane Post over the weekend, who really kind of runs this stuff. She runs all kinds of things, but kind of runs this stuff. And she says they think they can win a court case saying that the time limit that was placed on it was arbitrary. Most amendments don't have a time limit. And there have been some states that have rescinded their ratification, but she also says, and she's a lawyer, that there are court cases from previous amendments where states had tried to withdraw their ratification and were told they could not do that. Anyway, so it's another big push, and if you get a chance to provide some encouragement, what district is this? LD6? Well, not much help there. LD7. But if you get a chance, even if you think there's not much help there, let them know this is important. Because I asked Diane, when she gave this talk, why do we need this? And she gave a bunch of reasons that we need a constitutional protection. And when we see the kinds of things that are happening at the federal level, and the kind of executive decisions and we need a constitutional protection. Anyway, all right, I'm going to talk about education, budget, economics, tax stuff, and voter suppression, and then a handful of other things. And I will quit in time, plenty of time, for Q&A, but if you want to ask questions or make quick comments as we go, feel free. Hold up your hand. And if I can't see you, because I don't have my glasses on, they're on top of my head. I do not have eyes in the top of my head. So yell at me and we will find out what's on your mind, because I really want to be sure that we get a chance to hear what's on your mind and what you want to know. Now the thing is, if you want to be effective in the legislature, you need background information on this stuff, and you also need to know when to do something. That's one of the advantages of taking one of these, something like the legislative alert. It helps you know when is an opportunity to do something. How many of you are signed up for a request to speak? A few of you. Okay, if a bill is before a committee, you can actually weigh in from your house if you are signed up, but you do have to get signed up. And to do that, you need someone to sign you up down at the legislature, or go down there yourself. And it's yes.
We're going to be doing trainings on that.
When? Here?
Maybe as early as Monday, but here.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, mark that down, because this is wonderful. You know, if you know a bill's before a committee, you can get on. Once you sign up, it goes from year to year, and it will ask you, you know, up or down, and then you can write your comments. And guess what? At that hearing, right, they will say, has anyone signed up to speak? You could actually sign up to speak. Or you could speak if needed, or you could say, I don't want to speak. But in any case, before that goes to all the people on the committee. And before they vote, they usually say, what's the tally? And they'll say, well, there's, you know, 100 for it and there's 50 against it. Now that doesn't influence their vote much, I guess, but it lets people know that there's someone who cares. And anyway, so let's talk a little bit about budget and economics. The governor is going to unveil his budget tomorrow. And it's not going to be a big surprise that there will be opposition from Democrats and from his own party. The big headline, in my point of view, there's a $1.1 billion surplus. Did you get that? I don't know. I've been in a university a long time, and I ran a nonprofit research institute for a while. I don't like budgeting that is so stingy that you end up with a 10% surplus at the end of a year. To me, that's not good budgeting. We need to use taxpayer money to invest in things. And so, on the other hand, the economic predictions came out better than expected. But how's he planning on using this? You've probably read about this. He's planning, and this says a whole lot about his priorities, on taking $500 million, $500 million, and putting it where? To education? No, to the rainy day fund. And then he will be known as the governor who pumped up the rainy day fund to an historic high of $1 billion, rather than being known as the governor who pumped up education and put back most of the money that has been lost since the recession. So there's going to be a big fuss over this. We all have our own opinion, I think, as to how big a rainy day fund ought to be. There ought to be one, and there's different ideas on how big it ought to be, but I think this is going to be one of the big issues, and it really does show his priorities. Another one of his priorities, as we know, are tax cuts, and he opposes any tax increases. So we'll see what goes, because there's going to be Democrats and Republicans both opposing his budget, and usually the budget arguments, as you know, go on all during the session, right? And somewhere near the end of the session, they finally pass a budget. Okay, I'll talk a little more about some of that in a minute, but I do want to talk about education, because education is going to be a huge issue this year. And one of the main thrusts of these bills that have already been introduced and that will be introduced is basically to intimidate teachers, intimidate school boards and school districts, and try to make sure, as Kelly Townsend from Mason, one of the House members, has said, we need to make sure that teachers never do that to the people of Arizona again. Okay. As if standing up for public education is creating some great injury to people. How many people in here are or were teachers? A whole bunch of us, right? A whole bunch of us. There are 4 bills, House Bill 2015, 16, 17, and 18. And if you take the legislative alert, I always give you these numbers, because if you want to weigh in on request to speak or some of these other things, write down that number. You don't need it right this minute, but that's what they are. Here's what they would do. They would prohibit public schools from shutting down. As you know, a lot of schools closed, which protected the teachers who were walking out. School was closed, they didn't need to go. Well, this would keep them from doing it. They would prohibit schools from coordinating closures other than the vacation announcements, okay? They would prohibit using school resources to promote a political or religious ideology. Well, I think that's already prohibited, isn't it? I think so. I think I taught a long time, and I taught political science, and I knew that. And there's another bill, John Kavanaugh, does that ring a bell in anyone's mind? Oh yeah, has introduced House Bill 2026 that would prohibit public funds from being used as well. Okay, and there's still another one. This is House Bill 2002 from Fincham, LD 11. I don't know where 11 is, do you? Probably down there in Phoenix. Oh well. This one would restrict teachers from engaging in walkouts and things and so on, and that you can't discuss controversial action, okay? You can't discuss any legislation, court case, public official, or any controversial subject unless it's clearly a core part of the subject matter. So if I'm teaching American political parties, I can't talk about Arizona. Yes, sir. With your class. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's only in your class.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's only in your class. But listen to this. Here are some of the things in your class that you can't do. Okay. It would prohibit segregating students on the basis of race. Okay. So I suppose, I'm not sure what this means, but it would prohibit any discussion, listen to this, any discussion that one race is responsible for the suffering or injury to another. So we didn't have slavery, or if we did, it wasn't white people's fault. And we didn't have a trail of tears. And that, of course, didn't have anything to do with white people, did it? I don't think we must erase Japanese internment camps. All right? And this bill notes, actually, that it's trying to prohibit teaching for social justice. Oh, okay. That's House Bill 2002. There's some really bad stuff coming along. Okay, now, yes, sir.
So how do you think these bills will stand up in court? Because they sound very unconstitutional.
Well, they probably, but I don't like for them to pass. Okay, and these bills, the sponsor is a Republican. In most cases, these are more than half of Republican bills that are filed get a hearing. What percent of Democratic bills with Democratic sponsors, do you think even get a hearing?
Zero.
Well, actually, 9% get a hearing. How many? That was in 2016. I did a study of this, 2016, 9%. And only 4 in that year were actually signed, and all were bills of really no consequence. Okay, there's a charter school reform, right? Is that something we need? Any of you read the Arizona Republic terrific series on charter schools? Well, this bill, it's one small step toward reform. Guess what it does? It would require charter schools, school boards, teachers, everyone, to follow open meeting laws. What a concept. Okay, that one would probably pass muster in the courts if it passes. And there's another one. This is an odd bill that on that charter schools. Let me be sure I got it right. District schools, public schools, will follow the same procurement rules as charter schools. Okay, let that sink in. That public schools, district schools, will follow the same procurement rules as charter schools, which have almost no procurement rules. So rather than providing some accountability and removing some of the nepotism in procurement for charter schools, this would simply have public schools basically doing the same thing. So that one is called a reform. As Harriet said, there's some we can all, yeah. Okay, there's another bill that would require the state superintendent of public instruction, who is a Democrat, and the school board to get together and agree to a code of ethics for teachers. And then the bill goes on to lay out in excruciating detail exactly what is supposed to be in that code of ethics. And what I have read, and I haven't looked it up myself, is that most of the provisions in this code of ethics are taken word for word from a very right-wing group that is laying out, quote, standards for teachers in an effort to get them to not teach much about democracy or citizenship or social justice in their classrooms. So these are some of the bills. Well, there's another one. You know what empowerment scholarships are? All right, for those of you who don't, an empowerment scholarship enables a student who is qualified, and you know, what was the 305? That soundly defeated the expansion of these, but they're still there. They are still there. But an empowerment scholarship enables a qualified student to literally, and I don't mean that figuratively, literally take the money that would have gone to their public school. It goes on a debit card to the parents, who can use it to pay tuition at a private school, a religious school, or for homeschooling. Okay? Now this bill would require annual audits, which is a really good idea. However, it specifies that the annual audits will be done by the State Department of Treasury, not by the State Department of Education. It also actually says the treasurer is the only entity empowered to do these audits. So people are suspicious of this bill for a good reason. There was an audit done a few years ago, and actually a friend of mine was one of the people on that audit, and his comments about some of the things that they found were astounding. There were families that would get 5 or 6 kids eligible and take out, you know, ranges from $5,000 to $20,000 per kid for homeschooling and put it in a bank account. And there's just no accountability. So in education, we're going to see in Arizona a continuation of this nationwide move to privatize education. Okay, and that's what this is about. This is not about this little incremental bill here or that little incremental bill there. These are part of a much bigger grand plan to privatize public education. And what happens? Who can afford to go to the private schools and the religious schools? People who have more. And I'm sure many of these are good schools, and parents want the best for their kids. But what happens, we drain money out of the public schools, And what's left are the public schools for the people who can't go to private schools. The charter schools and the private schools don't have to provide transportation. We end up with a two-tiered public school system, and there are people. How many of us were graduates of a public school, for heaven's sakes? You know, I think the nearest private school when I was a kid was probably 200 miles away. Not as if anyone could go there. But we're going to see a lot of bills like this introduced by Republicans. Democrats may introduce some bills, and some of these bills may get tweaked and fixed, like that one for audits. Maybe they can get that bill fixed. We do need audits, but they should not be conducted on a partisan basis. They need to be done with the Department of Education, and they need to be done by accounting. How many of you are accountants in here? Any accountants? Well, accountants have professional ethics. Okay, let me talk about some more of the economic issues, in particular one that relates to education and other social services, and that's tax credits. Okay, I think you know, a tax credit is not the same thing as a deduction. A credit is a dollar for dollar takeaway from your income tax. If you make enough money to, let's say, owe $1,000 in state income tax, you could look down the list of, 30, 40, 50 qualified organizations that qualify for tax credits, including public schools that get a little credit and private schools that get a really big credit, solar energy, public welfare, okay? And you could, in fact, donate your $1,000 to those and then take that off your taxes. So you're making a straight trade. Now, what's wrong with that? You're giving money to something you believe in, right? It takes money out of the general fund, okay, dollar for dollar, and what that means then is when they say, oh, there just isn't enough money for X, it's true. Where did that money go? All right, it's going to donations to most of them, worthy causes, but it takes money from the general fund and it sends a message. What is the message here? Who should be supporting social welfare programs? Who should be supporting education? Not the government, okay? Individuals, rich people, and nonprofits. What happens? This is a Hobbesian choice. It's a slippery slope. Nonprofits come to rely on this tax credit money. But the downside of that is, the message is government isn't responsible for public services. Nonprofits are responsible. Rich people are responsible. Churches and charities are responsible. So, like I say, this is a Hobbesian choice. It's a slippery slope. But we will see bills introduced to give tax credits. One has already been introduced. It's been there before. It would permit teachers to buy school supplies that are used in their classroom worth up to $1,000 and then take a dollar for dollar credit off of their taxes. Dollar for dollar. So if you're a teacher, you buy a bunch of school supplies, and you use it in your classroom, it's great that you can take that off your taxes. But again, that's money that's not in the general fund. And it makes it even more true when the time comes that there's not enough money. And what else does it tell you? Who then is supposed to be funding school supplies? Teachers. Teachers. There's another one. Again, these bills, for example, 2011. This is an increased income tax subtraction for veterans. A lot of you are probably veterans. How many of you are in here are veterans? Okay? And we would like to support veterans. But this would increase the subtraction from your income from $2,500 to $6,250, then to $10,000. Reducing the taxes of veterans. What could be more laudable than that? Nothing. It's great, except it takes money out of the general fund, right? So that then, when the time comes, there's not enough money to fund things. They estimate this would cost $15 million a year when fully implemented. Okay, another big issue. And ma'am, could I have a glass of water? Okay, Sylvia Allen. Any of you familiar with Sylvia Allen? All right. She has introduced Senate Concurrent Resolution 1001. This, do you know what this one is?
Yes.
Some of you do. This would increase the sales tax from 0.6% to 1%. And if approved by the legislature, it would go to the voters in 2020 to be voted up or down. It would provide a steady stream of funding, which the Invest in Ed people and Red for Ed people really want. On the other hand, is it enough? It would provide about $400 million more, whereas the Invest for Ed initiative would have provided, I think, 690 or 700 million more. And there is about $1 billion funding for education that has been cut since before the 2008 recession. That has never been restored. Yes?
Plus, a sales tax is regressive.
Plus, a sales tax is regressive. That means poor people pay a bigger percent of their income for that sales tax than rich people do. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll take a pause here. All right. All right. So, on the one hand, again, legislation is never simple, and it's often a tough choice. Would this be a bill that we'd like to get on the ballot? Well, yes. On the other hand, if it gets on the ballot, will it bump off a bill or an initiative that might be raising it to 1.6%, or that might tax high income brackets? Now, one of my pet peeves is this gross, widespread misunderstanding of the marginal tax rate. And the Arizona Republic reported this wrong over and over and over again, and to the point that I sent an email a couple of times to one of the reporters, and then finally sent one to a friend of mine saying, why don't they fix this? Let me give you an example. Let's suppose I'm a millionaire. I'm not, but let's suppose you make $50,000, okay? The first $10,000 of your income, what's the tax rate? Do you know? It's 2.59%. Okay? The first $10,000 of my income, and I'm a millionaire, what's my tax rate on the first $10,000? No, 2.5. It's exactly the same. What's the tax rate on the rest of yours up to $50,000? It's 3% or something. What's the tax rate on mine up to 50? It's 3%. It's exactly the same. Okay? A millionaire has exactly the same tax rate on the first clump of money, $10,000, the second clump of money, the third clump of money. Okay? And the Invest for Ed increase was from only for people above $250,000. Okay? And it increased it from 4.5.9, which was the highest of the various brackets, to 8.5 or something. The way this was written, it made it sound like a millionaire used to pay 4.5% on their $1 million, and now they were going to pay 8.5% on their $1 million. Wrong. Wrong. If I were a millionaire, I would pay that 8.5% only on the part of my income above that last hunk. If I made $250,000 plus $1, how much more would I pay under that plan? I would pay that extra only on $1. Now, this is so widely misunderstood. That's what is meant by marginal tax rate. That 8.5% isn't on $1 million. It's only on the very top piece of that. And if you're fortunate enough to make that much money, yeah, you'd pay that, right? But most people can't pay that. Anyway, the Invest in Ed got bumped off the ballot, as you know, for ostensibly confusing language. I honestly think the Supreme Court judges were the only ones confused. Anyway, Sylvia Allen has this sales tax bill. Sales taxes are regressive. On the other hand, in some ways they are not as regressive as people think. And why is that? Most people with big incomes have so many deductions and exceptions and things, okay, that in fact they're not paying nearly as much on those top categories as what you think. But it is regressive, and the Democrats will probably oppose it. Some of the Republicans will. On the other hand, sometimes you take what's the best you can get. So I'm curious to see how this one will work out. Okay, let me talk about one more really big issue, and that's voting suppression, voting elections, and the strategies that are being used. Let me go back to the national scene. The national scene includes this effort to privatize education. It also includes this move toward tax credits rather than deductions. Okay? That's all across the country. As Harriet said, state legislatures, people realize now that state legislatures are more important, but even Congress is fiddling around with bills that would provide tax credits. They drain the money, and the Democrats in the Arizona legislature, for the most part, have said they won't support tax credits anymore, no matter what they are for. No matter what. But some of them still do. Anyway, okay, voting, elections, and democracy issues. There's been a whole slew of bills already introduced, and there will be even more. But let me start here with one, and it's a Republican bill, so it will probably get a hearing, and it's really surprising. This is House Bill 2021. How many of you have carried around one of those petitions and asked people to sign it? Goodness. How many of you have ever tried to write your name in those little tiny lines? All right. Guess what anyone know what this bill would do? This bill would let, online, it would let us sign petitions, citizen referendum and initiatives online. Imagine that, online. Okay, persons running for office can already sign online. You can register to vote online, but initiatives and referendum have never been granted that possibility, right? And so it costs enormous amounts of money, okay, to get an initiative going, because you have to pay a lot of volunteers, but you also have to pay a lot of people to go around and collect those signatures. Let me have a drink of water. I was in Sedona this morning, and I'm not used to talking for 2 or 3 hours. What happened to the outlaw dirty money? Okay, it didn't get enough signatures, even though it got plenty of signatures. A whole bunch got disqualified. What was the biggest bunch that got disqualified? There's a law passed in 2014 that says that any person can file a court challenge. Well, yeah, I guess you have to get a lawyer. File a court challenge against an initiative, and you can subpoena the people who carried those petitions around, and if they were paid collectors, they have to show up. And if they don't show up, all the signatures they collected are invalid. All of them. So 15 of the paid collectors in the Outlaw Dirty Money Initiative did not show up. They had 11 days notice, goodness. And the subpoenas were delivered to the initiative headquarters. That law even says you don't have to deliver the subpoena to the person. They didn't show up. They invalidated all those signatures. I think Terry Goddard is going to lead another petition. Probably this law, if it passes, might not be in time. But now, why would a Republican propose this bill? And it's not because I don't know him, but I think he must not be very smart. It's not because he thinks it will make it easier for people to collect signatures. What he says is that the descriptions of what's in the initiative by the people carrying around those petitions is often inaccurate. And if you could sign online, voters would go look up what it actually says, and you'd get fewer signatures. That's what he seems to think. But he also acknowledges it takes way too much time for the county recorders to have all those dumped at the last minute. All right. So this was a good bill, House Bill 2021, because can you imagine the difference if we could sign online? I mean, all people like me would need to do is let everybody know what it's about and give you the link. And you could go sign it online. And would it improve people's information about what the initiative is about? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. Most of the bills introduced in our legislature having to do with ballots, initiatives, voting, elections are bad bills. Okay, they tend to suppress voting and make it harder, not easier, as Harriet was saying. Make it easier, more people will vote. Who benefits from that? Democrats. And why is that? It's because Democrats tend to be less attentive and a little more marginal voters. Not you all, but this is part of who we are, I guess, as Democrats. So what that?
Benefits the public.
Benefit, yeah. Okay, another bill. You know, we have a two-tier voting system. If you have a photo ID, you can register to vote and you can get a whole ballot. If you do not have a photo ID and you don't go get one, which you could get with a passport or a birth certificate, then all you get is the ballot for the federal offices, where you have to show ID, but you don't have to have a photo ID. Okay, there's a bill, 2039, that would require county recorders to at least post the number of people who are filing the federal ballot instead of the state. So at least we would know how many people are disenfranchised for our state and local offices because they didn't have a photo ID. This, too, is a good bill. There's been a whole slew of other bills introduced having to do with voter suppression. I'm not going to read you all these numbers, but I will summarize just briefly for you what these things do. And they're one you have to fight these one at a time. So far, no one has introduced an omnibus bill, but one at a time. They would require identification for early voting. That means photo ID for early voting. It would restrict, let's see. Okay, how many of you are on the permanent early voting list? Most of you. You would not be able to deliver these to your polling place on election day. You would have to mail them in advance. All right. Okay, what if they discover a problem in the ballot that you sent them? Okay, the address is wrong or your signature doesn't look like your signature. You know, we have what's called a cure period. county recorders are supposed to contact you, say, you know, we can't read your signature. It doesn't look like the one you signed 50 years ago when you registered to vote. Sorry about that. You're supposed to have a cure period where you're notified if there's something wrong and you can fix it. This one would, in fact, allow curing only up to 5 days after an election. So if a whole bunch of these are dropped off on election day, they can work their heads off trying to notify people and get you down there to get it fixed. But 5 days after the election, boom, it's done. Now this year, Maricopa and Pima County took a lot longer than that.
So did Coconino.
So did Coconino, okay. And they went to court, I think the Republican State Committee, to try to force the Pima and Maricopa county recorders to stop counting them because they claimed it was unfair, the other counties weren't doing it, and instead the judge ruled that all the counties had to do it. I thought that was, be careful what you wish for. Another one of these would require identification at early voting centers. Still another one would make it a misdemeanor to give a full ballot to someone who's only eligible for a federal ballot, to the person, okay? And here's still another one. What's this guy's name? Thorpe? Okay. This would remove the category of inactive voter, and it would direct the county recorders to remove from voter lists anyone not voting in 2 consecutive primary and general elections over 4 years. Be removed. Okay?
Wait, 2 consecutive over 4 years? Is that what it says?
Yes.
So if you vote one time in the last 4 years, you're still removed?
No, if you vote one time, you're okay. If you don't vote all 4 times, you're removed. And there are people who don't vote all the time, who didn't expect to be removed. I don't think this even requires they be notified. Well, maybe it does. I should read it more carefully. Okay, here's another one. It tells the county supervisors, all right, that they cannot permit county recorders to allow voters to correct or supplement their affidavit after 7 p.m. on election day. So if there's something wrong with your ballot and you've been notified, you only have until 7 o'clock on election day to get it fixed. And if you dropped off your ballot on election day, you're out of luck. One of the things I have heard about the signature stuff is a lot of people now, what signature are they comparing your signature on your ballot to? The one at the Department of Motor Vehicles. And more young people, and people who forget, like me, to renew their license, are signing on that machine. Do you think my signature on that screen looks like the one I signed when I registered to vote? Probably not. Probably not. Anyway, there's, so that's another one. All right, there's a whole bunch of water and environmental bills. Sandy Barr was down in Sedona talking about those today. And I would just say one thing, and it's a lesson for all of us. She says, please don't just say these water bills are too complicated. So that's how we get into trouble. We've got to not let them be too complicated. There will be an ecological water bill introduced. There was last year and it didn't get anywhere. Maybe it will this year. That tries to make more sense out of surface water and the water situation in Arizona. We're going to have to pass something on this Colorado River, and then, you know, some of you know more about this than I do, and I'm taking to heart her notion that we can't just say this is too complicated, because I've kind of done that myself. Yes, sir.
On the water bills, you talked about, Lucy is talked about, it's all about conservation and how it's divvied up between states and that sort of thing. There's not a thing in there about fracking and water quality. Not a thing.
Well, Sandy said he only used the water once in his State of the State address. And I have heard. Yeah, Ducey said, who'd I say?
Sandy.
Sandy said that Ducey said he only used the word once, yeah. And that there's fracking going on, which is horizontal drilling that can let all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't want into a well, into that well in the underground water systems. So that's complicated. Let me mention just a couple more, and then we will open this up for comments and questions. Children's Action Alliance has alerted us to the fact that last year there was $56 million of federal money that was left on the table that could have gone for child support, child assistance support, and it was left on the table because the Arizona legislature did not pass a bill authorizing its expenditure. $56 million. So there's a bill now, House Bill 2125, introduced by UDAL, that would appropriate this money and permit it to be spent 18-19 fiscal year now and next year. So that's a good bill. Democrats have introduced some good bills to repeal some of the profiling on immigration, to restore rights of convicted felons when they finish their sentence. But as I said before, most Democratic bills don't, unless they're completely innocuous, like a state certificate for bilingual students or something. That was one that got signed. They don't get signed. So let me just stop there and see what's on your mind. What do you have to share, ask, so on? Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I've followed you for a long time.
Okay.
And I'm one of those people, I'm persistently annoyed with the flaky Arizona gun laws.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
All right, there's been one bill filed. It would restore felon rights to own a gun. So far, the only bill that's been filed is one that would restore the rights of felons who were denied the ability to own a gun, restore their rights. Now, there's any of you familiar with Meg Praelt, P-R-A-E-L-T? Okay, she's from Tucson, but she puts out a pretty good tracking system on gun legislation. Okay, and if you take the legislative alert, I usually have something in there with a link to her site. Here's the thing, for the legislative alert, I thought when I started this, I could just read, you know, the gun one, the Children's Action Alliance, school board, etc., and then compile those once a week into something. Well, not all that many groups track legislation, and some of them that do don't track it religiously. They don't track it systematically, okay? But this is a good one on guns, and what's it called? I bet if you just Googled her name, Meg, and misspell her last name, P-R-A-E-L-D-T, something sort of like that, gun safety in Arizona, you might find a link to it. Are there any gun safety groups up here that you know of?
Yeah.
Yours?
Mine is SOC, Save Our Children from Gun Violence.
Okay, and are you in touch with, there's also one in Phoenix, are you in touch with them?
No.
Okay, or the one in Tucson? Okay, it would help you, I think, to get on their list because they do track legislation. And that means that when a bill, and I track the gun laws too, as best I can. When a bill is coming up before a committee or it is moving, that's probably when I will put it in to alert people that now is the time you could do something about it. Yes?
And can you, I don't know if this is even possible, can you briefly explain the process? Because my sense is, from reading your thing, is that things happen quickly and you only have this very narrow window to actually respond and act. Is that true?
Yes, it is. However, here's the thing. The legislative alert that I put out, the last one, and I'll put out one probably Friday, I have the bill numbers in there. And when a bill has been filed, okay, before it's been assigned to a committee, something you can do, even at that point, you can contact the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and you can say, don't assign this bill to a committee, I'm opposed to it. Then it's assigned to a committee, but no hearing scheduled yet. Then you can contact the chair of that committee or the people on that committee and say, don't give it a hearing. Because half the bills that are assigned to a committee don't get a hearing. So at every step, there's something you can do. Now, once a hearing is scheduled, you only have 3 days, or about 3 days notice that a hearing is coming up. And that's when you can use the request to speak. So that's a very short notice. But after it's...
When you say contact these people, you mean with email or
okay, here's
phone or what?
the indivisible folks. Any of you indivisible folks here? All right, will tell us the best ways to do this is in person. But my take on this is do what you can from where you are with what you've got. Okay, for me, this is email. For you, maybe it's a phone. And you can get on azleg.com, Arizona Legislative Information System, and you get the names of committees. You can get a list of members. Again, I have those links in the report, but you can get on there and find. So if email's easiest for you, do email. If picking up the phone is easy, do that. And remember this. If you call a legislator's office, the chances are you're going to get an answering machine or a staff. Be nice to the staff. Be nice to the answering machine. But especially, be nice to the staff. Because they do count these phone calls. They do count these emails. Another effective thing, it's one of my favorite, I'm a hobby photographer. Any of you on my Facebook page? Okay, I don't do politics. I do pictures on my Facebook page. I will pick out one of my favorite pictures of some scene in Arizona, and I'll print it out, 4x6 or 5x7, cut it off, turn it over, draw a line, call it a postcard, and write something, a few sentences on that, and send it to a legislator. My idea is that maybe a really pretty postcard gets looked at. I don't know whether that's true or not. I would like to walk into a legislator's office and see one of my postcards on their bulletin board. So use whatever works for you. Go to one of the meetings. Speak up. That's what Indivisible did, and it's been very, very effective. Yes, ma'am.
So the request to speak, it's not even an option if the bill hasn't gone to the committee and it hasn't had a hearing?
That's correct.
It doesn't even let you do that?
That's right. It's an option only for a very short period of time. But let's say the bill started in the House. It's an option when it's before that committee in the House. But if it passes passes committee, then you can notify your legislator, or all of them, okay? And just raise holy hell about something, okay? And then it goes over to the Senate, and it goes through the whole process, so there'll be a second opportunity to use request to speak. But that's the big limitation. It's a wonderful thing, but it is a big limitation, because you have to hit that window, the window of opportunity. So, yes?
So once it's in the hearing, you have 3 days, is that what you said?
Well, the hearings are posted 3 days in advance. So like by Friday at 5 or 6 o'clock, I will probably know what bills are coming up Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But at the discretion of the chair. Some of those will get scratched, some might be added. I won't know until Monday evening what's coming up on Thursday. That's why it is important to subscribe to some of these. If you're interested in environmental stuff, subscribe to the Sierra Club. You know, if you're interested in guns, get a hold of the tracking that Meg does. And you do need to know when this window of opportunity is, and actually request to speak works for the Appropriations Committee when it goes there, but it doesn't work for the Rules Committee. That's weird. Yes?
I always thought that the one of the difficulties with all the gerrymandering is the shapes. You know, you have these kind of long, elongated shapes, and being kind of a math guy, there's you know, shapes have an area, and then they have a distance that is the actual line of the shape. And if you have like a ratio of the area to the distance of the lines around the shape, you can make...
You could identify gerrymandering, couldn't you?
Yeah, but the only thing that I kind of didn't really realize is that if you have like one standard shape and you have that ratio, if you increase the area and the perimeter the same, the distance changes. So I mean, the ratio changes. So you would need like a line graph.
In order to get the population to be pretty close to the same. Right, you would have to squeeze and expand. Well, that's an interesting idea. The biggest problem, it seems to me, are the fact that legislatures typically draw their own districts. And those are very partisan oriented. And the courts have said that you cannot gerrymander on the basis of race, but you can on the basis of political parties. And there's a case coming up before the Supreme Court that would challenge that. So we're doing okay. Well, that would challenge that, and maybe they will see that partisan gerrymandering is really detrimental. I don't know what they'll say. But one of the problems has been the lack of some way to measure gerrymandering. Okay, other questions or comments? Yes?
So sometimes at the end of the session, they'll do like a strike everything.
Oh, yeah.
And that's always confused me how that works.
All right.
I couldn't do anything about that.
Not all states do this, so it's a surprise. Strike everything's. All right, you can have let's say we've got a bill, one of these education bills, and let's say it passes the House, but in the Senate doesn't like it. Okay, it's not going anywhere, but it's already passed the House. And someone has some other bill that they want. Maybe they want to provide a tax credit for digging your own water well or something, okay? Doesn't even have to be related. They will strike everything in that original bill, except its number. They'll put this new bill in its place, all right? And that bill then, the Senate will consider that bill. Then if it passes the Senate, the House, it's different. So it will have to go back to the House to be passed again. But they can completely eliminate a bill and put something else in it, and the number doesn't change, and neither does the short title, which means if you're trying to track legislation, you can read a list of the strike everythings, but all you can read are the ones that went away, not what's new. So it's very hard to track these. They do sneak stuff in there. Yeah, this is really sneaky. It's a bad practice. It's very sneaky. The power of the party and the rules in the Arizona legislature, like most states, is enormous. The Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate do not have to assign a bill to a committee until the last day of the session. Then they'll take all the ones they didn't assign, they'll assign all of them to the Rules Committee, which of course can't hear them, because there's no time. And besides, they only hear bills after they've passed a substantive committee, all right? So then, if a bill is assigned to a committee, the chair does not have to schedule a hearing, okay? So, if they don't like the bill, there'll be no hearing on it. The power of the party is so enormous. There are ways to force a bill out of committee, but it's seldom done. And the minority party in a state, most states, has almost no ability to do anything. They can't even craft a piece of legislation that can get a hearing, unless they write it so that a Republican will put their name on it. Okay? So the power of the party is just huge. Other comments or questions? Thoughts? Yes, sir.
And can you give me an idea of what's the most effective way to get to these people like Ford or Allen? What's the most effective way to get their attention?
In person. And we've got someone from Indivisible. You want to speak to that issue?
Oh, no, I was standing up for another question.
Okay, the most effective way is to say something to them about it, in person. Build a relationship with your legislator, even if they're a Republican. That's the most effective thing. Many of you could do that. Okay, they have office hours here. They hold a something or other. I know Thorpe doesn't. Don't want to see me. But just lives here. But that is the most effective way. Let them know what you think and why you think it. Okay? Appeal to their public spiritedness. Appeal to the public interest. Appeal to what's fair, what's right, what's just. Okay? Appeal to their compassion and their, know where they're coming from, what are their arguments. If a legislator is on the committee for the topic you're interested in, they may know a great deal about it, and unless you're an expert, you'll probably lose an argument with them, okay? On the other hand, you don't have to be an expert to tell them your personal story. You know, that I have a child in public school and can't play in the band because they can't afford the uniforms. If you have a personal story, tell them your personal story. Anecdotes, I'm a political scientist. I like data. But anecdotes are more memorable than a bar chart, really. And so you don't have to be an expert to talk to them. On the other hand, if you're using request to speak, make it quick. I think it's like Twitter, you only have 140 characters or something. Tell them what you think, up or down, and a one or two line that it's not fair or it's not right or it will have bad consequences. I really try to avoid talking points and chants because I think they diminish our democracy, and try to stick with factoids or things like compassion, kindness, fairness as my rationales. Rather than saying, we'll build a wall, who's going to pay for it? This chant is what's driving this big issue about the wall. If Trump hadn't done this chant, he'd probably be more willing to back off of his wall. I don't know. So the most effective way is in person, but every little bit has some cumulative effect. You're not by yourself. Again, that's one of the advantages. You can't do everything at once, you can't learn everything at once, but you can gradually get yourself familiar with education issues or with environment issues. And over time, you get more and more familiar with it. You find the window of opportunity by the stuff you read. Put your legislators' phones on your speed, in your contact list. So you can just punch that number and call them, or punch that email address. Yes?
Since you brought up the wall, I received a text message this morning that says Trump is advertising for funding the wall and urging you to call this number. When you call, wait and press number 2 for a vote against the wall. It takes 15 seconds. So if anybody's interested, I would love to pass out this phone number.
Okay, is that direct action or one of those?
I don't know, it just says an 800 phone number. And
all right, read off your number. Is that okay with everybody? Okay.
The number is 800 350 6647.
Okay, you can.
And you just wait, because they can tell you to press 1 if you want the wall. But then you wait, and then it'll say,
press
oh, by
2
the way, press 2
if you don't.
Would you read that one more time?
Yeah.
Yes, it's 800 350 6647. And you just pass that number on to everybody to know.
You don't know if the source is though?
You don't know what?
You don't know where it's from?
I don't. Yes, it's always the risk.
That's the risk you take, yeah, yes.
As we've been sitting here, I've been seeing an ad for that I saw it twice on CNN.
Oh, for that number?
Yeah, for that number.
I get direct action. Of course, I drove up from Phoenix this morning, so I don't know, and you heard my phone ding over there 2 or 3 times. That may be from them, and they're certainly reputable.
Well, the text message I received was from my sister-in-law.
Oh, was, okay, forwarded to you.
Is she reputable? I want to know her credentials.
Yeah, okay. All right, are there other closing comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Schneider, thank you for coming to Flagstaff, and thank you for the legislative alert.
Yes.
I'm pretty just about reading it. Can you speak to ranked choice voting, and do you have any contacts in the state for that?
Ranked choice voting is a great way to make our election systems more efficient and more fair. What it is when you go in to vote, instead of just, voting for one and then they count those up and then you have a runoff and so on, you actually rank first, second, and third, okay? And so if no one gets a majority, all right, then the one who got the least votes, maybe the 6th person over here, gets dropped off. Everyone who voted for them, their second choice then goes in the hopper. If you don't have a majority yet, then you drop off the lowest vote getter, okay? And you continue doing that. Am I explaining it right? No, I don't have any contacts here. There are some states that actually have ranked choice voting. There may be some cities that do. But it means you have one election. You don't have to have runoffs. And you don't have someone who won by a plurality. You will eventually get to a majority. It means actually that every vote got counted. Every vote. So I do not have a contact. I think it's yeah. What else? Anything else? Well, okay, thank you. You're a great group.